All right, so it's 1 o'clock, so let's get started. Welcome everybody who's joined. Oh, I don't need that. You can see that, can't you?
Good.
This is a problem. This is a problem with live seminars, isn't it? So anything could happen, you see. But welcome everybody to the Calm and Chaos Virtual Learning Group series. I only started this last Friday. I had a really good response. And so delighted to continue this on a weekly basis, given what's going on in the world at the moment. I felt like it will be really good to have this regular exercise, if you like, of your inner calm muscles. So you just have that ability to access it when you need to. So those of you who've just joined, welcome. In this session, what I'll ask you to do is to mute and put the video off so that till later when we start to do Q&A, we might ask you to put it back on. But in the meantime, if you could turn your microphones off and the video off, that would be fantastic. If you're on a computer, those buttons are on the bottom left corner as far as I know. If you're on a device, I believe they might be in a different spot. It could be down the bottom or it could be up the top. So I'm just seeing at the moment some, Sarah, is it? I'm not sure, you're muted, but your video might still be on. So if you could turn it off on Zoom, that would be fantastic. Now, the other thing I would request, if you could, is to have a mobile device handy so that we can do some interactive work. So if you can have a mobile device handy nearby, that would be great. The other thing that we will do in this session, if you could please, if you have any questions or comments throughout the session and you want to contribute in some way, then just keep adding it to the chat box. Today, I'm lucky I've got Katrina as my guest, and therefore I have some space to actually look at the chat box, unlike last time where I was on my own. So it was really quite difficult to present as well as keep my eye on the chat box and everything else. But today I do. So please do add everything that you want to the question and questions or comments in the chat box, and I will certainly come back to that. We may not be able to answer all the questions, but as I said in the last session, I do intend to address some of those specific questions to other experts as well. And I will mention later on that I have some other people lined up. Now, the other thing to mention is that you do have permission to share this recording. I will send it to you this afternoon, sometime when I've loaded it up, and you have absolute permission to share. And if you could keep that in mind. The only thing that I will mention is that from today onwards, please pay if you can or wish to pay. And if you don't want to, or if you can't at the moment, because I know the environment is pretty tricky at the moment, so please don't pay if you can't or if you don't want to. It's just an optional thing. You know, we are in this world at the moment, chaotic world, so it is absolutely an optional thing. And I know some of you have already paid. Thank you so much. And those of you who want to pay by PayPal, you can. It's pretty straightforward. You just go to the PayPal website, the For You button and the send money button, and then you enter my email and away you go. But if you don't want to set up a PayPal account, because I just tested it this morning and you do have to set it up. If you don't want to do that, just please email the support@megumimiki.com to receive an invoice, and we can go from there. Just put the subject line Calm in Chaos invoice with your full name. That would be great. I think some of you might have just joined. Could you please mute and put your video off, please, just so that we can have some good sound. And as I said, $30, I'm just saying $30 as a guide, really. So if you want to pay less, you're quite welcome to do so. And just know that 20% will be donated to the food bank. And I do want to pay the speakers as well as they come on. So that's why I am asking people to pay if they can. So that's the plan for these series. Now, last session, if you were here, you would have listened to my 4 strategies. And I just thought I'll share with you a little bit about that, because what we're going to talk about with Katrina today will link into that. And I want to use these sessions as a weekly session so you can connect and make sure that you tap into that inner calm as well. So just briefly, my 4 strategies was about accepting that things are happening and accepting that we are feeling the way we are. Some of us might be feeling afraid or anxious or nervous. It's the worst thing you can do is to worry about your worrying. So accepting that. Secondly, to create time and space for pause. So please do find a space for pausing, and I'm hoping that these series of virtual learning groups can give you that opportunity to pause. So I will do a little pause exercise in a moment. That pause will give you that ability to step back, see things in a different perspective, which allows you to do the third strategy, which is to reframe. Reframing is about looking at things differently, to take another perspective, because the world's gone upside down, we may have to turn upside down to have a look at it differently. So that's some of the strategies. The number 4 is when you start to look at things differently, you might find that there are opportunities to adapt, opportunities to give, opportunities to do something different. And all of these are in the first session. So if you want to learn more about it, please go to the recording, which I think I have sent, but I will send again. So just quickly, if you think about those 4 strategies, this is the interactive part. So if you can have your mobile devices ready. How have you gone in the last week? How do you feel you have accepted the situation, but also not judging and just taking it in as it is, and your feelings and all of that? How do you feel you've gone in terms of taking that time, that pause? How do you feel you've been able to reframe things rather than just getting caught in the chaos and the anxiety and things? How do you feel you've been able to adapt and even find opportunities in the situations we find ourselves in? So if you could go to a browser, go to menti.com, and if you could go to put in a number, which is 555558, and put in your responses. How have you managed yourself in the last week?
Yeah,
you didn't have to deal with it, or you need a lot of work?
For a couple of projects that are coming up.
Okay, so I'm going to mute people who are coming up.
Virtual meetings, virtual trainings.
Okay. So those of you who just joined, please mute, and also video off as well, if you could. That would be great. So the scale is, there's no need to work on it. I've been fine to need a lot of work. Okay, so just a sense of where you're at. What do you need to be working on? Okay, so that's interesting, just to check in how you're going, and how have you been using those strategies? Thank you. So I'm going to go back to my slides if I can. Here we go. So let's just take a time. I don't know how many people are online. I've got 27 people now. So the opportunity of these sessions is very much to deliberately create time for pause. And this is one of the things that I did in the last session. So I'll just do another version of what I did last time. So give yourself a comfortable space. If you're sitting on the couch or in a seat, that's fine. Just find a really comfortable space to sit, or you can sit on the floor cross-legged if you want to. That's absolutely fine. And if you could just find a comfortable position to sit, and make sure that you're feeling okay about where you are. And just start to notice your breathing for a moment. Just start to notice your breathing, whether it's shallow, whether it's deep. Just notice where it is at the moment without any judgment. And as you notice your breathing, please just see if you can deepen your breathing. Meaning that if you are breathing very shallowly at the top of your chest, if you can breathe more into the belly. And if you can breathe into your belly consciously and start to gradually, not forcefully, but gradually slow your breathing. And if you are able to, if you can breathe in for about 4 counts and breathe out for 6 counts. And those of you, if you haven't got mute on, please do mute. Breathe in for 4 and breathe out for 6. Breathe in for 4 and breathe out for 6. So the breathing out for longer accesses the calming side of your system, the parasympathetic nervous system. So keep doing that, breathing in for 4 and breathing out for 6. And if you want to, please do close your eyes if you haven't already. And if you'd like, just start to think about the things that you're grateful for at this point. Things that you appreciate. The fact that you're sitting in a room. The fact that you're able to access the internet and be online with a whole group of people. The fact that you're well enough to join us. Other things that you might be grateful for. Just bring that to mind. And have a little smile inside and say thank you to all those things that you're grateful for. And once you've given your thanks, please come back to your breath. And just gradually open your eyes or come back to the screen to be back into the session where we can now have that inner calm state to learn from Katrina today. Great, thank you. All right, I hope that was helpful to get us to a place where we can be resourceful and be able to learn and connect with each other as well. So we're on to today's guest, which I'm so excited about, Katrina. Thank you so much for coming on board so quickly at the very last minute. I think we only spoke on Tuesday, so it was a very quick turnaround. But I did mention to everybody, I might just get you to turn the video off for some of you. So Wayne and Nicole and Angela, I'm not sure what's happening there, but if you could turn the video off, that would be great. Thank you. So we can just have Katrina. But I'd like to introduce you to Katrina. Katrina's a Paralympic gold medalist. In fact, she was at the Atlanta Games in 1996 and Sydney in 2000, and she did not just get gold, she also got silver and bronze. And her Paralympic experiences led her to become an international speaker. She has been on the TED stage, and she's also the ambassador for the International Paralympic Committee. And she also works as an international speaker, but in particular working with or sharing with people insights around leadership and personal mastery. And also she has founded the New Day Leadership movement, if you like. And she has been running these incredible events in Adelaide. She's based in Adelaide, which she talks about leading for the greater good, leadership for the greater good, which is inspiring and absolutely amazing. And I was there last year as a speaker, and I was planning to go this year. But of course, with all that's going on, the face-to-face session may not happen at the time that she wanted to do it. But yeah, thank you so much, Katrina. Very, very delighted to have you on the screen today.
Thanks, Megumi. You're very easy to say yes to within an instant, and even the way you and I met was, I think, a really beautiful story. We were both speakers at a conference in Brisbane, and I just really connected with what Megumi said, and she connected with what I said, and afterwards we connected and we both said how much we really enjoyed each other, and it's been wonderful to learn from each other and be in this moment together today.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Katrina's also, I should mention that she's been one of my Quietly Powerful Leader interviewees. Those of you who know my work, I have been doing a work called Quietly Powerful, which is very much about helping quieter professionals to feel that they have amazing powers, that they can contribute to the world, and they can absolutely be amazing leaders. And I also want to change the world's thinking about what good leadership looks, sounds and feels like. And in particular, in this current environment, I think we need more quietly powerful leaders who are able to instill calm and so on. So Katrina was one of my interviewees, and she has been quoted in my book, which I released in November last year as well. So there's plenty more I can share about that, but today is very much about Katrina. So please do feel free to ask me later if you'd like to do that. Now, so Katrina, can I first start with asking you, could you please share with us a little bit about yourself and your journey? Because you were a Paralympian, but there's a whole journey before that I have heard about, which is absolutely inspiring. Pursuit of excellence, coming to terms with the disability, but also very much stepping into your full self. And I really would love for you to share that.
Yeah, thanks, Megumi. You know, I've been thinking about this today, as I do share my story a lot, and I'll do the brief version of it. I just wanted to give a bit of context around it as well, in where I'm feeling, why I was really keen to share my story today, with two reasons coming out of my story. One of them was around, yes, having a disability and being a Paralympian, and one of my strong learnings from that was learning to deal with my shame around it and how I've developed my own shame resilience. And when we're in the moment we are now, we're having to be a lot more vulnerable. We're having to, and vulnerability and anxiety go together, and being a lot more vulnerable, a lot of shame can come up with that. And so I really wanted to talk about maybe that parallel to where people are today. And also, in my whole journey as a gold medalist, I'm also a physiotherapist by trade. So I've been taught how to think in a very diagnostic way, a way in which I can look for problems, try and find what the cause is, and then give people solutions. I don't like to fix biceps and knees. I haven't done that. I do a little bit of my physio to keep registered, but I've applied that thinking to help people bring their best and power their best every day. So my story is that I was born with mild cerebral palsy. It was picked up at age 3 that there was something wrong with me, because I was limping as a young child, but it never got labelled cerebral palsy at 3. So my parents did know that there was something wrong. They were told that I had suffered a very mild brain injury in utero, and that's why I was limping on my right side. I did have some treatment for it. I actually had to wear one of these tiny little plasters to bed from age 3 until I stopped growing. So, I mean, that's quite a significant physical treatment. I had to wear that on my right calf until I stopped growing every night to bed, which was around 3,500 nights. And I would visit a physio and I'd see a specialist throughout the year. The interesting part about my whole story is it wasn't until I was 18 at the Australian Institute of Sport on a fully able-bodied netball program that I realised what I was hiding was actually labelled cerebral palsy. So from age 3 to 18, I knew that I had something wrong. Of course, I was having treatment for it. But because I didn't really understand what it was, and because people can't really see it, I developed this habit of doing my absolute best to hide it. My young brain at age 5 started to see kids wearing plaster at school when they'd broken something. So our brains and our thinking is incredibly amazing, that I started to think, even then as a 5-year-old, well, I have to wear a plaster every night to bed, then I must be really broken. And if I'm broken, people won't like me, I might not fit in. And that's where I first started to feel that emotion of shame about being broken. So from that point of age 5 to 18, I worked incredibly hard to cover it up. And that's what we tend to do when we feel vulnerable or we experience shame, is we cover up, we mask up, we do everything can to make sure people won't notice our differences. So it led me to be at the Australian Institute of Sport. I worked very hard at doing that, which there is some good strengths that come out of that. And being at the Australian Institute of Sport in Canberra in 1995 on an able-bodied netball scholarship was amazing, but that's where my pivot point happened. I firstly developed a significant injury that had me sidelined for 10 weeks on my right side, in my right knee, which is always hard to deal with. The second thing that happened then, once I got back on the court, I started not to get picked for the team. And as an 18-year-old, that was my first real experience of not being good enough, as being rejected. And the coach I had at the time wasn't a fabulous communicator and was a difficult coach. What she did do was tell me the truth, that at that point in the competition that we were playing, which is one of the best in the world, that I actually wasn't going to be good enough. And that was really hard to take, because I'd told myself for a long time that I wasn't good enough. And I was working very hard at trying to prove to people that I was, and then to be told that I wasn't, triggered my shame again around that. And the third thing that happened in a small space of time is that what I was hiding, well, I thought I was hiding, but I wasn't doing a great job, because there was the coach who was training athletes to go to the next Paralympic Games in Atlanta in 1996. As soon as he saw me walking at the Australian Institute of Sport, he noticed my cerebral palsy straight away. He's trained to see it. And so, as you can imagine, when he discovered me, he was so excited to, to see that I was there, and we did a few tests and it was confirmed that what I had was cerebral palsy. It wasn't a diagnosis, it was just labeling what I had. And so he was so excited. And can I say, in my whole journey, he is the only, I'm so grateful for this human, because he's the only person that's ever been incredibly excited about my cerebral palsy. I've never experienced somebody else share so much excitement and joy in something that I was ashamed of. And he approached me and told me that if I could get classified, which is a part of getting into the Paralympic Games, and if I was good enough, of course, if I could qualify in a Paralympic sport, then I could go to my first Paralympic Games, which would have been Atlanta 1996. The short story is I wasn't excited and pumped up and jumping for joy when he approached me. In fact, I experienced fear, and it triggered my shame again, because when I heard him say I could go to a Paralympic Games, it meant that I'd be a Paralympian, which meant that people would know there's something wrong with me, and I deeply hated that side. So it was an interesting pivot point, turning point, which we're all in right now. We all are in this point, and I'm experiencing it again. And the best bit of advice that I got from that coach at the time was, he said to me, why don't you go and sit with a sports psychologist and talk through this situation? And I didn't even think twice about it, because we were using a psychologist every week in our sporting program. We were a part of the best program in Australia, one of the best in the world. And psychologists were there to help us to deliver our results as athletes. So sitting down with that psychologist was an absolute turning point for me. And I can maybe unpack what happened a bit later on around what I learned from that situation, Megumi. But what I did learn in that situation was that the Paralympics was exactly where I needed to be. I then headed off to my first games in Atlanta in 96, and then went to Sydney and Athens. I competed in the sport of track and field, and had a very successful career, winning gold at my first games. But it took 8 years to Athens in 2004 to win my third gold. So I had this 8-year journey of really leading myself, and I call it alchemize now. What did I learn to do to turn that silver back into gold? And what are some of those key lessons that I've been able to translate into my my life as a mother and a wife of 3 beautiful boys, as a businesswoman, and as someone that wants to do great in the world.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, because I think how you connected it to where we are at the moment is incredibly powerful, where something's happened that's out of your control and you had to absolutely pivot. And I think that's where we are. You know, there's nothing we can do about what's going on at the moment, and it's nobody's fault. It's just happening. So how can we go past that, accept it, and work with it? So what would you say for, in terms of that time when you had to really learn to pivot and learn to adapt and all of that? What did you take away from that time?
Yeah, the most significant thing I learned, and maybe I will unpack what I learned from this psychologist, because I'm using these skills daily, and I'm so incredibly grateful that as a gold medalist, and not only from this point where I first experienced working with a psychologist at the AIS, but I have invested in having psychologists as an athlete for my whole career. And even now I surround myself with psychologists. I adore them. I did think about going to be one, but I don't want to work as a clinical one, because I can already do that as a physio. I love how complicated we make. Let me say this again. I love humans. I'm very fascinated on how complicated we can make our own lives, and how that there are tools that can make it less complicated, and how we can remain calm. And so, since understanding, well, I can actually learn to lead my own mind instead of it leading me. Even this morning, I was in a webinar with another psychologist, again, looking at what I can learn. And the reflection on that for me is, as an athlete, as a gold medalist, I was given a psychologist to go from being good but to go to being great, and to be a gold medalist. And all the tools that I learned, not only as an athlete, were the exact tools I needed as a person who was hiding something I didn't like about myself, to actually accept and learn to love my disability. And no one else offered me those tools in any other aspect of my life. So I feel so much gratitude to sport for seeing how powerful psychology can be. And I feel like it's my mission and purpose, and that I need to keep sharing this, because often still in society, when do we offer psychology support or access to it? We are getting better now, but it still is.
I've just lost your audio. Katrina, I've just lost your audio. You're not on mute. Katrina, I can't hear. I'm hearing some crackles. Do you want to take off the microphone and see if we can go with that?
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Oh, no, we can hear now.
Yeah, no, I have a pair, lovely technology. I have a pair of AirPods sitting there, and it decided to jump on.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Maybe I wasn't supposed to share that bit.
Oh, that's all right.
So what the light bulb moment for me, sitting with a psychologist, he said to me, let's look at this situation you're in, and maybe this is something we can all do right now when we're facing a situation that is unknown. He said, I want you to write down a list of all the things that you're worried about on one side of, so I was sitting at a table, and he had 2 big pieces of butcher's paper out, and he said, I want you to write down a list of all the things you're worried about, and on the other side of the table, we're going to write down a list of all the things that could be opportunities out of this situation. And this was around me making a decision around whether I was going to move forward into the Paralympic movement. The significant thing that he did, Megumi, was that he put my thinking on the table, and he had me sitting in a chair like this, and he created space between myself and my thinking. Gee, that is a wonderful skill. If you have it in your toolkit, I've been using it so much this week around when I start to get caught up in my negative thinking, how to go back to that space, to check in whether that thinking is fact, is it balanced, is it right, is it helpful? And in that space, then can I go to the other side and look at, well, what would be helpful in this situation? So he made me realize that my thinking is a part of me, and I can choose whether I let my thinking lead me in life or whether I lead my thinking. And that process was life-changing. I actually got to write down a list of the things that I was worried about, and they're the worries that I still have every day. And having worries and negative thoughts aren't sign of a weak mind, they're just sign of a human mind. And knowing that I could develop a good relationship with those, and then just to allow those negatives to sit there and go, well, what is opportunity in this situation? And when I was able to do that, I realized that all of my values and goals were in this situation. It was just packaged differently. And I'm feeling like that now too, even in my business, and my business has taken a huge hit as well, around things can be packaged differently. And sometimes when we have experiences like this, we can take that moment and that pause to say, how can we be creative? And as long as it's what I really value and what my goals are centered around, maybe it isn't a different package that I never thought could exist.
Yeah, no, fantastic how by creating that distance between your thinking and not allowing it to control you, I think that's a very powerful message. So in terms of being an athlete and accessing that inner calm under pressure, what have you been taught around that? So why we talk about pressure in this context is that I think in the last week or so, everything's turned upside down, and there's so many announcements coming at us over and over. Every day there's something new going on or some new restriction, and that can feel like a lot of pressure. So what have you learned around that?
Yeah, that is such a great question. Pressure as an athlete was a really big thing I had to deal with. I often say to people, I don't need anyone to sabotage me because I do a very good job of it myself.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone else relates to that. So I had to work incredibly hard at learning to be my best friend and my cheerleader than being my worst enemy, and having tools in place to do that. And so even in terms of competing and how do you stay calm when you've got a whole stadium full of people, but then you know that everyone's about to watch what you've put on the line over the last 8 years. I learned some really powerful tools that might be helpful for people now. One of those was when, as an athlete, we started to get quite anxious and nervous and start to worry about the outcome and whether we're going to win or not. We were taught a really powerful tool that I still use, is that we actually created time to worry, if you want to call it that, worry time. So psychologists would tell us that pick a time throughout the day, and say it might be 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that you will say that is going to be the time where you allow yourself to actually worry.
Okay.
And it's a really wonderful process, because if I take it to an athlete context, say I was at training, then I came out of training, then I started to wander off in my thinking and start to ruminate and start to make up stuff that wasn't even true or helpful, or start to even sabotage. Oh, what happens if I lose? I'm not good enough, I'm older. That I would actually pause and unhook myself and say, thanks mind, you're only allowed to think about that at 4 o'clock today. And so it would happen a lot, and I had to practice this process of going, okay, that's at 4 o'clock today, that's at 4 o'clock today. Why? Because thinking and worrying takes up so much of our energy, and it actually can. And I was in a webinar this morning, and I love what somebody said, that worrying actually takes away our ability to problem solve. And right now we need a lot of ability to problem solve. And so it would actually conserve our energy. And so as a gold medalist, one thing I learned to do was master my energy. You've probably never thought about gold medalists of being masters of their energy. So one of the tools that we used was, we're not going to waste energy in worrying, but if we allow ourselves time to then say at 4 o'clock, we're going to allow that to happen, it was then that was the time. It is such a really powerful tool. I don't know if anyone else has used it. And then when you get to that 4 o'clock time, instead of just sitting there and going, okay, I'm going to worry now, and just let it all come, you can actually structure it, and ask yourself some questions like, what am I worried about?
Yeah.
And then actually start to list it. And even that process of listing it is helpful. And then, what's really likely to happen? Have I got all the evidence? Have I got the right facts? Do I need to go out there and get a bit of information? And how can I start to balance some of my thinking?
Yeah.
And so that structured thinking time, that worry time, was incredibly powerful for helping us to calm, not just before the race, which probably most people would think about, but this is a 4-year cycle. We train these things. So then when you do get to the race, you've practiced some of these skills that now become skills that I'm using in times like this.
That's brilliant. I think that talks to very much about training our minds to be able to do these things. And one of the articles that I posted recently was about, are you exercising your inner calm muscles enough? Because if you don't exercise them, they go. And also, if you haven't practiced them for a long time, or if you don't practice it regularly, then just like meditation or just like physical training, the muscles can go. So that's very, very relevant here. But also connecting those two things, the worry time, I love that, to conserve your energy, but also that structured worry time rather than just that random, and particularly those of us who tend to be overthinkers, which I admit I'm one of them. If we don't manage that overthinking into a useful overthinking, it can go out of control too. So I think that structured approach can be helpful. I mentioned a little bit about that in my reframe part of the strategy, to ask some of those questions like, what's the worst that could happen? How likely is that to happen?
Yes.
Yeah, if it's really bad, but it's only like 1% chance, then, and that whole idea of, well, how bad is it really compared to, say, if you're in a war situation currently, it's not like we're out of food right now. So it's not as bad as we might think it is. So some of those are really important.
And also, I train in wellbeing and resilience in my city, and one of the strategies we use around helping to balance our thinking is to collect the facts, like you said, but also phone a friend. And not phone a friend that is going to just say, yeah, you're right. Like, have someone that you can call to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. I'm really caught up in it. Can you help me just see whether it's balanced or not? So maybe times like this, it's helpful to ring friends when we're caught up in our thinking and remunerating. That can be a really powerful thing. One of the other things I learned too, Megumi, and it will relate to, I loved your breath session. As a physio, that's one of the skills we're taught incredibly well to do, is teach people how to breathe, and the power of the breath, and that we actually have forgotten how powerful that is. Calming ourselves, and it's free and it's available. So thank you for doing that session with us to begin with, and for us to realise that we have one tool, the only known tool to help reduce our stress hormone, which is cortisol, is the power of the breath. So taking time, we would do that as well. I still do that daily to make sure I keep myself calm. And centered around that.
Yeah, definitely. So that connects to meditation. If you can do meditation, that's great. But if you don't have time, you can use that breathing even for a minute, just that conscious breathing for a minute, and any time during the day, and you can help yourself that way for sure.
Well, and I think a good thing around meditation and mindfulness is finding a way that works for you, and really trying different modalities around it, and particularly around, and so we learn a lot about being in the present moment, and the gift from, I love the present moment, and to try and learn to be in it more often, because when you're in the present moment, particularly in times like this, there's no future and there's no past, and it's so relieving. And so when I get caught up in a bit of, and I still am, it's like, okay, what can I do right now to get back to the present moment? Because I'm free and I can calm. I found a really powerful, I spend a lot of time in Nepal. I don't know if I'll get there this year, but it'll be my 11th trip in 5 years. And I have some incredible spiritual teachers I love learning from. I'm a science brain through I love science through allied health. And I also love Eastern philosophies and learning from 2,500 years. And I've found over my whole journey of meditation, even just a set of mala beads, 108 beads, and I go around on a daily basis and use those mala beads to either to have an affirmation, or I use a mantra, and I've learned a really powerful one from Buddhism. And it's 108 mala beads, and that's it. And I find the beads really helpful because there's something for me to focus on. So it's taken me some time to find the right tool for meditation, and even if it's just a minute each day, the power of it. And when people say they can't do mindfulness or meditation, in fact, simply what it is, it's not about sitting there and being in the present moment for like forever. It's actually just realizing when your thoughts start to wander off, that you bring yourself back. And then when you wander off again, you bring yourself back. And when you wander off and you bring yourself back, that actually is meditation. It's actually the process of noticing when you're wandering off. And so we would practice this a lot as athletes, because we needed to be able to be present in the moment at the start line of a race and not wander off into unhelpful thinking. So having a practice of whatever it is for you, a minute a day, just to be able to notice when you wander off and come back. And if you're doing it every 5 seconds, that's okay. That's actually what meditation is. When people say that's really hard, that you're actually doing it. It's not about sitting there being blissfully in the present moment for an hour. And that's the tool though for then being able to start to really unpack our thinking. I often say to people, my disability I don't feel like it's disabled me too much, but my thinking has and can. And I don't want to be in a position where I'm disabled by my thinking. I really want to try and enable my thinking as much as possible.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point about both about thinking about your thinking or working with your thinking, but also meditation, how often people misconceive meditation as, you have to be calm and you're in this bliss, and it's not necessarily that. Sometimes you get that, but often you don't. And the whole practice of noticing your thoughts and coming back is the training of the mind. And when you do that regularly, so I think we're talking about the same thing, it's the training that helps you in those moments when you have those unhelpful thoughts to catch them very quickly and be able to manage it, which connects to what you were saying earlier about your worry, catching your worries, putting it to 4 o'clock, etc. So it's all connected.
And I'm having to use those tools. This week for me, I have been so grateful that for most of my life I've spent on wellbeing, resilience and self-leadership, and I'm drawing on those things readily at the moment. So if you haven't got some of these in place, shout out to us, and or I really encourage you, if you thought, oh, that's not for me, actually, you might be surprised.
Yeah, definitely. So when we chatted on Tuesday, you talked about a few other strategies or tips around managing ourselves and finding that inner calm under pressure. Would you like to share a bit about those?
Yeah, we've talked a good amount about mind management, which is lovely. So normally when I do a presentation around the alchemy of performance or alchemize, I often talk about 3 areas which have been significant for me. And mind management is that one. I think we've discussed that quite a lot today. The other 2 areas, the first one I like to talk about is priority management, and the middle one is energy management. And probably for me around priority management, what I wanted to, and what I've been reflecting on a lot myself, is when I speak about this one, it is really about thinking about what are your priorities of how you want to be known in life. And I know a dear colleague of mine is on now, and he talks about your true north. And I've been reflecting on that this whole time around how do I want people to know me, how I reacted and how I showed up even through this time. And so often with a group of people, even resilience training will talk about, what do you want people to say about your retirement party? What do you want people to say about your 80th birthday? What's the legacy that you're leaving? When you're in a space, how do you hold it? When you walk out of a space, what do people say about you? And really tapping into what you want to be known for. And gee, this is such a time to go, well, what do I want to be known for? And while we're experiencing something that we've never seen before, often I look at leaders when they're dealing with crisis is what I'm interested to see how someone shows up, not when things are going great. And so even as an observer of my friends and the community and people who haven't actually got access to some tools that I know it's my work, so it's been very helpful for me, is just asking that question around, you know, what do I want to be known for? And when I get out of this period, what will people say about me, particularly my loved ones who are about to spend a lot of time with me, about how I did show up? So tapping into your values right now, tapping into, and one of those for me, Megumi, for a long time has been, I actually really want to be known as calm. I want people to feel comfortable around me. And a lot of people often use a word for me around that I have grace, and they're really important values for me, even during this time around, am I showing up with them? Particularly for the people that I absolutely love the most and who will be seeing a lot of me.
Absolutely. I suppose the question is, do you want to be known as the toilet paper hoarder or the person that held the calm?
That's right.
So certainly my intent with this is that we're spreading calm rather than the virus or the panic that people might be experiencing around the world. So it's great that you're spreading it too.
Well, and you have to have tools in your kit to know how to bring that. So it's okay to say these are my values, and if you also don't have some wellbeing resilience tools in your kit to know how to use them and how to align them to your goals, and how to check in whether they're really important to you or not.
Definitely.
So I think it's a really good time to look at your priorities. I also know during this time, and what I'm going to be challenged with is in such a changing space, over being very distracted, and because we are out of our environment. So actually looking at, you know, creating schedules and what's really important for us to do on a daily basis, and looking at look out for maybe patterns and traps that we might get into that distract ourselves from what the really important stuff is that we want to do. So I'm very conscious of that, making sure I do the stuff that really matters in this time. So that's priority management. If I step into energy management, this is probably one of my favorite areas as an athlete. And I said before, I learned to master my energy. What does that look like? And not every athlete does this. I know some of my athlete friends that stopped being an athlete. They were doing sport because it was their work, and then their work changed, that they don't know how to master their energy. For me, my health, my well-being and being an athlete is at the core of what I want to be known for. It is really what I value. So one of my personal hacks that I do share with a lot of people every time I speak is creating meetings with yourself. So when I was an athlete, I never got to just be an athlete. I had to work, I studied, I became a very good manager of my time. And the only way I could still get really good results was that my training as an athlete was non-negotiable. So if people wanted to step into other areas of my time, I probably had a bit more flexibility. But in terms of my training, if someone rang me and said, Katrina, could I meet you at 5 on a Tuesday? It was never negotiable, because that's when I trained. And so now that I'm not an athlete, I still follow that same principle, that even though I'm not running an athlete schedule of training, for me, what training is actually, how am I looking after my energy? And if energy is our currency of health and performance, do you have your own energy management plan in place? So what does that look like for me? I schedule meetings in with myself daily. And at the moment, there's quite a few. There's even more than 1 or 2 going on daily, because I need to turn this up a bit more to even manage this ability to stay at home and work from home. And in those meetings with myself, people would ring me and say, can I meet you at this time? And I'd say, no, I'm in a meeting. They didn't know that it was with myself, but now I've actually developed enough courage to tell people that I'm in a meeting with myself at that time, because that is really important to self-care and lead myself to bring my best. So in that space, I can give ideas of what I do, but that's really not important. It's about finding what brings its precision here. It's not universal. It's about finding what brings your best energy. Sometimes we need a bit more yang. Sometimes we need a bit more yin, depending on what's going on. Sometimes we need to calm. Sometimes we need to activate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at different activities, it doesn't, you hear I won't say exercise. It can be, but it can be a variety of different things. So for some of you, if that's helpful, when you get your diary out to do your working from home or how you're going to schedule it in, put meetings in with yourself, see them as non-negotiable, speak to the people around you to say, look, this is really important for me. This is a boundary they want to have in place, and how can we make this happen?
No, that's fantastic. And talk about energy management. I did have a question from somebody who registered before. And by the way, those of you who are listening, please type in any comments or things that sort of resonated with you, as well as questions in the chat box, so that I can start to ask them in a moment. But the question that I got in the registration was, I'm struggling not being able to do my usual exercises. So, this person does a lot of swimming and can't go to the pool. So just thinking, how have you been creative around finding places or things to do to exercise?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I'm very fortunate that I do spend a lot of time doing yoga for a whole bunch of reasons, and the science behind it, particularly mentally. Just watching my yoga studio in the whole panic of it all, have to go online. And we did a session the other night together, and the community is just supporting her. And to see my yoga teacher cry at the end of the session, not in sadness, but of so much joy and gratefulness that her community is supporting her through this tough time. It was one of my favourite moments this week. My yoga's actually, I can do more of it, so that's been helpful. If you're a swimmer, I know that's a very different situation because our pools are closed. Mind you, we have oceans too, I suppose, whether we can get a wetsuit and get into the ocean. It's about thinking about, well, what were you getting from that activity? And really being creative and testing out a few more different things. And use this time now to try so many different activities. And by trying new things, we're actually growing new brain at the same time. And if we're actually moving, we're growing new brain. And if we move in nature, we're growing brain. So you're getting three things happening again. One of my dear friends is Dr. Fiona Kerr, who's a neuroscientist, and she talks about growing new brain. One of them is moving in nature. One of them is exercising, and one of them is trying new things. So you could pop the three together and find creative ways to continue to move.
That's fantastic.
Yesterday, my day out, my exciting moment was my exercise was walking to the supermarket. And I reflected on that going, wow, this is interesting. This is the only thing I've gone out for today. I've combined my movement with something practical. Since the start of the year, a good friend of mine challenged me to do 10,000 steps a day. And I've been sticking by that since the start of the year. So if there's anyone else that might go, you know what, maybe I can't swim, but hey, Kat, I'll jump on board and do 10,000 steps. It is a really great thing to do. And as someone who's active myself, I'm surprised at how sedentary I am with stepping. So maybe some of you, if even your iPhones can measure your steps, if you haven't got a Fitbit. And
a tip that I can give, watching my daughter, who's a dancer, and she has to keep her strength up, and she's been told that by her teachers because the school closed on Tuesday, is aerobics wise, skipping ropes. Oh my God, it is really, really hard. I've tried to do it for a minute and I was exhausted, and I'm not that fit, but even for my daughter, as she said, she started off with 5 minutes and that was quite hard, and she's very fit. And now she's up to 6.5, and she's increasing it so that she can really build up that aerobic strength.
That's great.
So there's a few different things. Are there any other questions from the group? Please do keep on asking if you have any. But my other question that I had in the registration was, how can I stay focused on my work and outcomes when there's so much going on? And I know that that's connected to that managing our mental state. But if you had a take on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, and self-care, absolute priority in this space. And putting that into your schedule, and having a schedule. I think that's and not having distractions. I think actually maybe spending time when we get settled into our home going, wow, look at all these things that are distracting me, which don't normally, and developing a system around trying to work out how they can't, be your distraction. And also, some of the mental tools we've spoken about.
Yeah, definitely. So I just had a quick look at the comments, and they're mostly comments. One person commented that her daughter has a mild cerebral palsy, so that would have been very interesting to hear your story, which is lovely. And thank you. There's a few thank yous. And fabulous so far, so that's great. Thank you.
Okay,
There's
can
any
I
other
make a comment?
Yeah,
I'll
please.
make a comment on that. Karina, really special to hear that. And for me, in my whole story of going to the Paralympics, it was extraordinary. It was to win gold 3 times over 3 games, to do the things that I still get to do. I was going to be in Tokyo as an ambassador for the International Paralympic Committee this year. It would have been my 6th games. It will be postponed, and that's okay. I've really had a wonderful experience of meeting people globally, and thanks to the Paralympic movement and thanks to winning gold. For me, though, out of my biggest gift out of the Paralympic movement was, in fact, those tools that I said that I learned from a psychologist around winning a gold medal were the exact tools I needed to learn to love and accept myself. And that was a process, and that took time. And to be able to be here with you all today and to honestly and authentically say to you that I now are in peace and actually love the fact that I'm different. And that took some time and some processes. And my reflection on that is that we're all looking for a point of difference. And I didn't know that the thing that was my difference was the thing that was holding me back. And I know when I first went to the Paralympic Games, and one of the reasons why I chose to go to the Paralympic Games was not about winning gold. Yes, I am a high performer and I love to achieve, and a few of my goals were lined up with that. My number one value is around helping and making a difference. It's in my core. It has been since I was a kid. It's why I became a physio. It's why I do what I do now. And I remember asking myself a question at age 18. Why do I hate being different so much? And why do I hate this thing about myself so much? And that's a really strong question to ask yourself at any point in your life when you know that there's something that you know is hidden and you don't like about yourself. And I remember asking that question because, to be honest with you, I was incredibly exhausted already at 18 in hiding it. It took so much of my cognitive capacity to make sure that I was a step ahead of everyone, to make sure they wouldn't see that my right calf is thinner than my left, that they wouldn't see that I can't balance very well on my right leg, that I can't curl my right toes, yet I can do it so easy on my left. That if a friend came to stay the night, I wouldn't wear my plaster. In fact, I negotiated with my parents at age 5 that we weren't to tell anybody that there was something wrong with me. So I had to I was exhausted. I remember thinking, what am I doing this for? Because this is not working for me. I'm exhausted already. And if I become a Paralympian, yes, it's going to put a label on me. Yes, that's what I will, I'll have to learn to deal with what that means. But if I can learn to love and accept myself, that is the right thing to do. And that's what I want to do. And if I can do that, and there's a young kid just like me, that when someone comes up to them and says, do you know what, you could be our next gold medalist as a Paralympian, instead of feeling the shame that I did, what drives my work today is that I would love for a young kid who has cerebral palsy just like me to go, wow, just like an able-bodied kid would if someone said, you're awesome, you could go the next Olympics.
That's amazing.
I'm so grateful. I feel honestly like I won the lottery in the Paralympic movement, because I learned these skills for shame resilience. I learned high performance mindset skills that every day I challenge myself to take my whole self everywhere I go. And one of the interesting stats for me that really woke me up last year was that in Australia, 2.4 million people have a disability. And I didn't know this. I thought it was the opposite, that in fact, 90% of disability in Australia is hidden. And I, for some reason, had told myself another story that only 10% were hidden and 90% were, because for a long time along my journey, people would say to me, but Katrina, you're not disabled enough. You're not disabled enough. You're not disabled enough. And that is a really tough question, not question, but a comment to get, because you're not enough, but I'm not able enough, not disabled enough. And so I didn't speak up enough around disability advocacy and how important diversity inclusion in until now, because I now realise that I speak for 90% of the population.
Yeah, definitely. Which is also what I speak about in my Quietly Powerful, about not getting so quietly disempowered, trying to hide everything that we have, but also this whole idea that sometimes if we reframe our weaknesses, it can become our greatest strength, which is exactly what you did. And that's what you've got to offer, an amazing contribution. Now, I know that there's a couple of questions in there, but it is nearly time. So I'm just going to finish off with something that I wanted to share with you. I'll just do it very quickly. So we've done all that. I just wanted to share that this Calm and Chaos series are going to continue weekly for the foreseeable future while we're going through this chaotic time. And my intent is very much to spread calm rather than the virus or the panic, as I said. So it is a weekly pause and learning conversations like we did today, but it might take different forms depending on the speaker. I'm in touch with different speakers. And as I mentioned, please pay about $30 if you can, and please don't pay if you can't. I really mean that, and you're very welcome to join without paying. And please note that 20% of the proceeds will be donated to the food bank, who I believe that they do need a lot of support right now. I won't go through all of this because it's a lot, but I wanted to share with you the next few series of learning groups. I do have some amazing speakers coming on board. Annalie Blundell, who's a professional people whisperer who decodes people and communication. So it's, my conversation with her will be very much about how do we speak with people and influence people when they're anxious and when they're perhaps panicky, etc. I've also got Susan Wahab, who's an author of Money Intelligence, Financial Strategist and Money Mentor. I'm sure many people will be worried about the financial situation, the economic situation. So I asked her if she could speak a little bit about how we can prepare for a bit of quite an economic downturn, so quite practical. Michelle Gibbings, who's studying, currently doing a PhD on gratitude, so I wanted to go into gratitude with her. She's also a workplace expert, so she might have some tips around how we work in this current environment. And then Jo Skipper, who's the director at the Next Group, a recruitment firm, talent finder, connector and builder, to ask about networking and job hunting in this current situation, which is quite difficult. So practical and quite philosophical, various things. So I'll be finding people to talk with over the next few weeks. I just wanted to share with you a couple of things to finish off. Reframing. I think this was an interesting one. Your grandparents were called in to fight the world wars. You're being called to wash your hands and sit on the couch. So don't stuff this up. There was a different word in there, but I won't say that on screen. And the last thing, I just think about, your legacy. September 2050, John opened the last package of toilet paper bought by his parents in 2020. Please don't do that. So I hope that was useful for you. Please leave comments in terms of any feedback or thoughts, or any thoughts for Katrina as well before you leave. We'd love to hear from you. And I hope to see you another time if you can join us. And please stay well. Please wash your hands and keep distance and do all the things, do all the right things. But yes, please stay well, most importantly. And
Megumi, I'll also pop my email in. People can find me
awesome.
on my website. So if anyone has a personal question or a question that we didn't get time to answer, I'm more than happy to contact with people.
Yes, that's awesome. And I'll be sending out the recording as well, so I'll put your details on that too.
Thanks, Megumi.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for your time, and so for doing it in the last minute.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, bye, everyone.